to Arab Radio or 2000 FM radio, or to those who are watching the live stream. I'm joined today by Charisma Calienda. She is the recently state-elected Labour MP for Liverpool. Before that, Charisma was an immigrant from India. She came here at a young age with her family and can be considered a shining example of the Australian migrant success story. Without further ado, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Great, Joseph. Thank you for having me today.
My pleasure. To start off, could you tell us a bit about your personal professional background leading up to your entry into state politics?
Sure. So I am a registered occupational therapist by profession, and my background has always been working with young people. So before I got elected to state parliament, I was working for a youth mental health organisation called Headspace here in southwest Sydney. And then more recently, I was working on a project for the University of New South Wales Health Service in their mental health space. So my passion has always been with young people and obviously in the healthcare system, and making sure that our young people, especially those in our community here in the southwest of Sydney, can reach our full potential.
I also obviously wanted to ask you about what you want to see change or improve in your community, but based on your professional background, I could take it perhaps education, youth, etc. would be your interests during your time in office and what you'd like to improve in your community?
Absolutely. And I think there's so many different parts of our government, of our various institutions that intersect to give us the framework or the scaffold to be able to succeed in life, if I can put it that simply. So when we think about how we can do well, it's not just our education, our health systems, and also the support that we have in terms of youth facilities and programs, but also things that are more fundamental like public transport and roads. Because I remember I went to university in the east of Sydney, and it took me about an hour and a half each way, and I couldn't afford to move out of home, so I commuted each day. And unfortunately, that hour and a half commute, as it was 10, 15 years ago, has actually gotten worse. So for a lot of young people in our community who might be not only pursuing higher education, but they might be in trades, so they might be doing apprenticeships or going to TAFE, or they might even be working, spending 2-3 hours a day in traffic or on public transport is just par for the course for many young people in southwest and western Sydney. And that actually affects our quality of life. It affects the opportunities that we can take up, and then it affects our capacity to have hobbies and have things that create more meaningful lives for us all.
You speak with a great amount of passion about these various issues. But when I asked about your professional background, you obviously didn't mention that how you entered politics. Was it this passion that got you into politics, or was it connections, etc.?
It was, I have to go back and say it was like a combination of complaining. And then someone asking me a very important question.
Yeah.
So I was complaining about an issue that I was experiencing, and someone said, well, I understand that's that sounds terrible, but what will you do about it?
Okay.
And it was, I think, one of the first times that someone had actually asked me that question, but it's a question that I keep coming back to.
Okay.
So that question was asked in the context of my university life. So I think I was complaining about some of my courses being cancelled and changes to our timetables or something like that. And so that question got me involved in the Student Representative Council at my university and making sure the voices of students were represented to the university management and the board of the university as well. And we actually got a great win. And this was 15 years ago. And then more recently, I think it was around 2015 or 16, I was complaining about the development of high-rise apartments a few streets away from me. And I literally looked at the development and I said, who thought this was a good idea? Why would you decide to say yes to this. And it was at that point that my local member of parliament at the time, Paul Lynch, my predecessor, said, that's a very good question. But, council is the place that these sorts of things get decided. Council elections are coming up soon. Have you thought about putting your hand up? And I can honestly say I hadn't. So I thought, you know what, that's a way of getting involved and actually being a constructive part of solving the complaint that I'm raising. And so I think reflecting on that, I've always been someone who wants to be part of a solution rather than just kind of complaining. And same deal with, all of these issues that I'm seeing after being on council for the last 6 or 7 years. I've recognized that a lot of the problems that people have come to me with, a lot of the issues and the challenges that I see for Liverpool as a whole, are actually decisions that are made at a state government level in terms of the resources that we're allocated, the nature of the public transport we have access to, our health system. All of these things are the responsibility of state governments. And so when Paul said that he was intending to retire and encouraged me to put my hand up, I thought, you know what, I've been talking about some of these issues and these challenges for Liverpool and our community for so long. Here's an opportunity to be part of that solution and to advocate at a different level for our community.
So was it around that time, 2015-16, that you
Yeah.
joined the Labour Party because of issues with these high rises, or had you been a member of the party beforehand?
I'd been a member of the party beforehand since university. So
During the university cuts you mentioned earlier?
that's right. So I got involved in that campaign, and it was one of those experiences that really changed the way that I saw how people come together, how people can affect change. So, to give you a story about how that all worked, as a group of students, we were able to operate on two levels. So on the one hand, we really wanted to hear from students about the impact of, course cuts and changes to the university timetable. So, how did it affect their capacity to work? How did it affect their learning? How did it affect the content that they could, that they could take on board during their courses, right? And then on the other hand, we also wanted to give people an opportunity to vent their emotions, because I think so much of the time in political spaces, or when people have change forced upon them, there's an emotional response, there's a frustration, there's an anger, and that also has to have a space to be viewed, to be heard by people in positions of power. So we ran a survey and we collected the results of that survey, all of the things that students were telling us, and we presented that in a report to the University Council, which is the highest decision-making body of the university. And we said, this is what students are telling us. And we went one step further. We said, here are some options that we have modeled in terms of what you're proposing, what students want you to take on board, and what some reasonable middle ground options are, which was really constructively viewed, which was great. And on the other hand, we organised opportunities for students to really talk about how they were feeling. So, for example, we organised a sit-in outside the university library, which afforded students an opportunity to really say, hey, these are ways that these changes are affecting us negatively, and this is what we want to see instead. So we made sure that we were operating at both of those levels.
Based on what you've told me about your time in politics, you've really been community involved in your campaigning and the way you act in office and in general. In this election, did you have a similar approach to that? Did you essentially conduct a survey with people in Liverpool about what they felt was the biggest issue that they were currently worried about?
We unfortunately didn't have quite enough time to do some of those things, but what we did do was check in on the issues that people were highlighting to us. So we did try and do as much face-to-face conversations and engagement with people as possible. So, for example, I spent many weekends through the campaign actually knocking on people's doors to say, "Hi, I'm your candidate at the upcoming state election. I would love to hear from you about what your ideas, what your concerns, what the challenges for you are, and how we can work together in resolving some of those things." And as a result of doing that, I noticed that there were a few topics that kept coming up in certain areas. So, for example, in Warwick Farm, one of the issues that kept coming up was parking around the railway station, around the local school, and the impacts of those things on the local community, especially as you have growing area, changes to the type of housing that's in the area, and then changes to the local parking station and things like that as well. So when we noticed that a few people were talking about these issues, we then did a engagement activity. So we basically organized a parking forum or a parking sort of discussion point, and let everyone in that part of Warwick Farm know that we would be, at the park next to the station on a Thursday afternoon when people can just, come straight over as they're going home from work. They can come over, have a chat with us, let us know if there's anything else that we should be aware of. And so, that's just one example of the types of things that we did to more meaningfully engage with people and understand what their issues were. And as a result of that engagement, we are now putting forward some possible solutions. So working with, say, Liverpool Council to develop a parking permit system in that area. So it's not finalised, but it's a work in progress where we can say, hey, these are the things that residents are really concerned about that are affecting their daily lives and that are really frustrating to them. So how can we look at a solution that addresses those things, but also looks at the constraints that might exist?
And also in regards to issues that perhaps more greatly faced by people in Liverpool, for example, we are obviously currently going through a cost of living crisis. As part of the new Labour state government, is there a concise plan in place to tackle this issue? And if there is, what would your role be in tackling it for your electorate?
It's a good question because, a lot of surveys, there's a lot of indication that it's the number one issue that people are concerned about and that they care about. In terms of as a state government, we have to be mindful of the ways that we can and can't affect the cost of living. So unfortunately, we don't have control over things like interest rates. So we need to be mindful of that. But on the other hand, we do have control over something like the tolls that people are paying. So one of the commitments that the Labor government went into the election with and that we are honouring is to cap the amount that people pay in tolls every week. So similar to the cap that people have on public transport. So, when you tap on and tap off using your Opal card, if you catch the train or the bus or whatever it is, there's a cap of $60 a week. There's no reason as to why that cap should also not exist for toll roads and the tolls that people pay. So that's one way that we're really looking at the things that might meaningfully contribute to a family's household budget, because especially for people in this part of Sydney, many are reliant on cars. Many need to travel all over Sydney in order to do their work or get to places, especially if they run businesses or are involved or work in other parts of Sydney. And reducing the amount that they pay in tolls is one way that we can affect that. But we also are looking, and the other thing that we really need to be mindful of is the ways that people's wages aren't right or have not been rising in the last few years. So again, when you look at the types of workers that make up a lot of our state, a lot of them are public servants, like your teachers, like paramedics, like nurses, and police, and other types of essential public workers. And many of these workers have had a wage freeze over the last few years, which was implemented during COVID. These workers have gone above and beyond to support our community in the last 3 to 4 years. And unfortunately, on the one hand, they're seeing rising costs of living. So, every time they go to Woolworths or Coles or whatever grocery store to buy what their family needs for the week, they're paying more, but their wages aren't rising either. So one of the other commitments that we made was to lift that wages cap, so that some of our essential workers and some of these people who are at the pointy end of this cost of living crisis are better able to manage those priorities.
Would you happen to know why the wage freeze was initially put in place and how it's going to be funded now? Would it be funded via new taxes?
So we are, every budget is about priorities.
Okay.
And what the Treasurer is doing at the moment is going line by line through the budget to get a better sense of some of the commitments and some of the sources of waste, if I can call it that. Financial waste that would be better spent in addressing these priorities.
Okay.
So, we're really looking at, what is going to serve us well, what is going to serve our state well going forward, and what is not going to serve our state.
So essentially reallocating money that would be better spent on increasing wages.
And the other point I would make is, part of the reason why, there was media criticism in the lead up to the election saying that, there was not enough razzle-dazzle in terms of Labor's commitments, right? Not enough big spending, not enough, not enough big spending or whatnot, was because we were very careful and prudent in what we wanted to commit going into the election, because we knew that, like I said, a budget is about priorities, and our priority is to make sure that, many of the people in our state who weren't feeling like their work was valued, who weren't feeling like they were living in a state that was going forward, were able to really see that we prioritize the people living in this state. The state is not, the people of this state aren't just cash cows that we just extract more and more money from. And the privatization debate that occurred during the election campaign was very much front and center of that, because I think the community has recognized that whilst you might have a one-off monetary injection from selling off public assets, long term it actually costs our community more.
If we could circle back to you now, I mentioned at the beginning how you're an immigrant from India, and we can consider your life an Australian migrant success story. Would you hope that your background essentially serves as an inspiration to other immigrants who've come to Australia to pursue the highest office or their greatest dreams?
Look, I think the beauty of Australia as a country is that there are so many opportunities that are afforded to those of us who may come from anywhere in the world. Okay. I think there's a line in one of Barack Obama's speeches where he talks about the exceptionalism of his story in the lead up to becoming president. And I remember when he said that, when he was talking about his story and how nowhere else in the world would something like that happen, I thought, no, Australia, it can happen in Australia as well. And I think my journey is an example of how it could be politics, it could be working in the media, it could be business, it could be any field. There are migrants who are doing incredible things across the board. And I think there is so much, there is so much within the way that our system works that helps to, bring us up or gives us a foundation that we can work from. If there's one thing that I would encourage, my fellow migrants and people that have, people that have, different cultural backgrounds, is to take an interest in civic participation, take an interest in, what's happening in our local political spaces. And even though, sometimes it may not, it may not directly seem as if you're represented or whatever that might be, you are a part of our great nation, you're part of our broader community. So all of the decisions that are made by governments and politicians and decision makers, they affect you. So, you should have a voice, and you it's essential. I think you should have a voice in that as well.
Obviously, you were only elected a few weeks ago.
Mm.
How have you found orientation? Just newly elected politicians I've spoken to in the past can say orientation could be a bit overwhelming, just trying to understand parliamentary procedure, etc. How are you finding it? And was there anything that is now part of your daily routine that you weren't expecting it to be?
So I would definitely say it is a little bit overwhelming. There's lots of information that you need to take on board. So many different processes, procedures, people. It's a big learning curve, if I can definitely put it that way. The one thing that did surprise me, though, I thought, and a few of my family friends and others also thought, you have the election, you get elected, or the results are reasonably clear, and then on Monday you go in and you start working as the local member.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not like that.
How is it like?
So there's about a 2 or 3 week process where you obviously have the election that takes place, and the Electoral Commission processes the results, and they count all the ballot papers, and that can take a couple of weeks' time. Especially,
really?
It can. So especially in this election where there were a number of electorates which were very close. So on the night you had a few electorates that seemed to be leaning one way, and then as they were counted more votes, it became a lot closer, and the result actually may have been a little bit different once all of the votes were counted. And so it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for the official declaration of the result to take place. So to give you an idea, the election was held on the 25th of March, and for the Legislative Assembly, which is all of the different electorates, the geographical electorates of New South Wales, the declaration was on the 14th of April. So it's about 3 weeks.
10 days ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and until that official declaration takes place, so the official declaration is just the electoral commissioner saying, this is the officially certified result for each electorate, signs off on it, and sends that information to the Governor of New South Wales.
Okay.
So that's just the formal process of it. So that was held on the 14th. There was only one electorate where there was a recount that was held on the 15th of April. So that electorate was declared following the recount because the result was so close. It came down to the last sort of 50 or 60 votes. So very, very close.
I imagine that's not common.
No, not common at all. So once the declaration takes place, then the sort of the staff or the department of what's called parliamentary services, they can then start onboarding the new members. So up until last Monday, I was not able to access the office or have an email or have a way of hiring staff or anything like that. So all of those things actually happen after the declaration. So there's a 3-week period where you are kind of known as the new member of parliament in the community. So there are people that are contacting you, they're approaching you, they are talking about their issues with you, and you're going along to events and things like that, but you don't have the official email or the capacity to write representations on their behalf and things like that.
I imagine that's quite frustrating because you're probably hearing a lot of stories of issues from people, but you can't do anything, and then once you finally can, you have to go through those issues that you heard and try to help out how you can. So it's a very rushed process from how you describe it.
People are pretty patient, which I'm very grateful for. So I think, some of that is balanced out by just kind of explaining that process to people and saying, look, I hear you, I understand you, but, and just kind of having those discussions and conversations, but then kind of lining up when you put forward your representation or that email to once you're declared. So I still am in the process of finalizing my letterhead. So that's the next thing. So I can officially kind of send out letters and things like that. But that's the process. That's the nature of things, and you understand why it happens because for example, back in previous times, the count could take longer than a few days, and sometimes they do multiple counts just to make sure that the result is exactly correct, and there's nothing that's been missed, or there's no oversights and things like that. So even though our world has changed and we expect things in a much shorter turnaround, these processes exist to make sure that we get things correct rather than try and rush it and get things wrong in the process. But for me, I know not every member of parliament is in that position, because some are taking over from a retiring member like myself. Some are taking over from an opponent that was the sitting member previously. So there's a transition there, and others are perhaps in a new electorate, like one of my colleagues. So there's all sorts of different situations and different different things that people are walking into.
To conclude, what's a message that you'd like to leave with your community today?
Yeah.
As we leave, and as you mentioned just now, you're still trying to set up your email and office and everything.
Yeah.
What's the best way for your electorate to contact you?
Well, the good news is, as of sort of late last week, we have the email up and running. The office, the office is still taking phone calls and things like that. So we are in a lucky position in which our office is ready to go, ready to hit the ground running. Some of those fine tuning things like the letterhead are still coming on board, but every single day we're moving further and further to being more established. So the best way to contact us, if you Google my name, or I think it would be good to put a link into this email. So in the caption, there'll be a link to our contact details. You can contact the office to make an appointment. I started seeing constituents for for appointments and things like that last week, which I think was a real joy for me, because unfortunately you do hear people who may not have been they may be in very difficult circumstances in a range of different issues, and you want to try and assist them with their situation. But for me, that's a real joy, because that's what I see as the reason why I got elected, to help people with those issues who don't know where to turn, who don't have that bridge between where they are and what's happening more broadly within the government or whatever part of the system that they need assistance with. And that's the role of your local member of parliament or your local representative. They are the bridge between you as a community member, an ordinary citizen, whatever it might be, and that level of government and the things that are the responsibility of that level of government. So your local MP is your representative, and so they should be working for you, which is, I think, a message that I really would like to put out there. I know, especially for those of us from different cultural backgrounds, we may have very different ideas about, public representatives, and, how you can get in contact with them, and, what they do, and, where their level of responsibility lies. But I think, and so we may have difficulty in feeling comfortable reaching out to them or reaching out to their office to make appointments or raise issues, and kind of say, hey, there's this thing that I'm concerned about. But I think for me, I really love being engaged and connected with the community. So I would really invite people to get in touch if you're experiencing an issue, or even if you have ideas or suggestions about what we could do to improve our community, because that's our responsibility as well. And I don't think that I'm the smartest person in the room. So I would love, the ideas and suggestions of others in our community as to how we can work together to make our part of the world better.
Thank you for that message, and thank you for your time, Charisma. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joseph. I really enjoyed this.
And as well, thank you to all who watched the AusArab live stream, or who tuned in via AusArab Radio or 2000 FM radio. Thank you, and have a good evening. All right.
Excellent.